Hi, welcome to Spin Sisters. I'm Mary LaHammer.
And I'm Tara Erickson, and we are very privileged today to have former Republican Governor Arne Carlson joining us today. Talk a little bit about what's happening here in Minnesota and some other things he's got some major opinions about, including mining in northern Minnesota. So,
you got
Mary,
it.
let's get started.
Thank you.
Yeah, Governor, let's start with, you were a Republican who represented Minneapolis on the city council, in the legislature. You were state auditor, 2 times reelected as governor for Minnesota. You obviously care about Minneapolis, and I think maybe it's hard for people to even imagine a Republican representing Minneapolis.
Yeah.
First of all, from all that perspective, from city council, from legislature, as governor, tell us you have some solutions in mind about what can happen right now to help what's going on with the federal, state, local issues that are just gripping Minneapolis and Minnesota.
Yeah.
What are your ideas?
I think we have to start with something that's vitally important, and that there is very little trust by Americans in their public officials.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, 83% of Americans do not trust their government. And that's got to be restored. A large part of the reason for that distrust is the enormous power of financial interests.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, it's built a huge gap between the public and the people that are supposed to represent them. The public does not feel that elected officials represent them, but rather the moneyed interests who fund their campaigns. Therein lies the conundrum. Now, in terms of Minnesota, we're the victims of a serious political fight that's way out of control. Plus, frankly, and I've written about it, I'm not going to mince words on this show, I think a very seriously mentally ill president. And that poses a serious problem. And I think his mental health has to become part of a public discussion, because we have a process for removal, but that process is not going to work as long as you have loyalists in charge of the process, which is what we have. So we have a serious crisis in America.
So what can be done? What's a practical solution? Yeah.
Well, I wish I could sit here and say I've got all the answers. I don't.
Yeah.
But in terms of Minneapolis, I do think we can do the following. One is, we all have to know what is the strategy. Frankly, there is no strategy. There's a series of directives. Do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. But what is the strategy? I would suggest the following, and I've written to the governor about it.
Mm-hmm.
One, the political system does not speak for all of Minnesota. So let's bring in all the segments of Minnesota. Let's bring in the business community, the religious leaders, the nonprofit leaders, the academic leaders. Let's bring in the farmers, everybody, and form a commission. I would like to see Kathleen Blatz, a highly respected former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court,
Mm-hmm.
and Jeff Ettinger, former president of
Hormel.
Hormel,
Mm-hmm.
and the University of Minnesota as chairs, and try to get that committee to diffuse the situation. Instead of having the governor and the president square off, which is only going to lead to a fight, let's have that commission meet with the White House and start to discuss rational strategies for diffusing the situation.
Governor, can I ask you, though, I don't, since they picked Minnesota, which if you were really going after undocumented immigrants and undocumented criminals, you wouldn't be coming to Minnesota. So,
That's correct.
on average, it looks like we are, from estimates, it's about 130,000 undocumented immigrants here in Minnesota. So clearly that's not where you would be coming. I think they want escalation. Otherwise, the tactics that they are using would not be happening. And, I just kind of want your take on that. I think about, when I look at federal law, like the Posse Comitatus Act and then the Insurrection Act, The first one is to prevent the military from essentially doing militarization of policing. And the second one is used only generally when a governor wants that to happen. But at this point, it's being used, it used to be used to make sure that people's civil rights were kept intact.
Okay.
And this one seems to be, if he does call for that, it's to squash our civil rights. So I want your take on that part.
Okay. Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Okay. I'm jumping ahead, am I?
Well, it takes two to fight.
Sure.
So the question is, do you want to be number two? Or do you want to try to do everything you can to diffuse the situation? And so what we discussed is, let's form this commission. Let's see if we can have a meeting with the White House and start to agree on strategies to de-escalate it. What precisely is the issue? Is ICE actually interested in violations of immigration law? If so, we'll assist you. But it's going to be done in an orderly and legal fashion. Now, the second part has to be, and this is where I'm kind of surprised Minnesota hasn't done it. Philadelphia has made it abundantly clear to ICE agents that you stay within the law. And if you violate the law, we will arrest you. And that's what Minnesota has to do. Let me give you an example. Do we excuse a United States senator from a speeding ticket because he's a United States senator?
We shouldn't.
No. If the chief of police gets into a fight and a brawl, do we not arrest him just because he's chief of police? There's no special rights granted to agents of ICE. They don't even have police powers. Their responsibility is the enforcement of customs and immigration.
But Governor,
So
we're not doing this. If I can interject, literally the story I did last week on Almanac, I had Minneapolis attorney, former mayoral candidate Clint Connor on, and he was a partner in a big law firm in Minneapolis. And his argument was, we actually need to do what Philadelphia is doing and allow law enforcement to enforce the law against ICE.
Look, you have to know the rules of engagement. Yeah. We haven't discussed them.
Why not?
So,
why aren't we willing to do it?
That's a good question to ask, but you got to ask Governor Walz, the mayor, and those people about it. But
because individual police forces cannot do this on their own, right? They do need the backing of the attorney general, the governor.
I was very impressed. If I were governor, I would want both the head of the BWCA, and I was very impressed with the chief of police of Minneapolis, O'Hara.
The BCA,
The BCA.
And I'm sorry, the what?
The BCA.
The BCA, I'm sorry, And put them in charge.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a legal understanding that as long as you do your job here, that's fine. But the minute you violate the law, you will be taken into court. You will be arrested. That's the way it is. That's the way the law works. Nobody is above the law, and that includes agents of ICE. I mean, I think that should be abundantly clear. I think if you can take those two steps, you're going to have a lot of clarity, and that's what we need right now. We need clarity. The Minnesota Constitution guarantees security. Ask yourself, does anybody feel secure?
No, I think people feel
they're terrorized. They're absolutely terrorized. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so we have a federal judge who ruled that ICE agents were violating at least protesters' First Amendment rights.
Of course they are. Look.
But what about the people in custody? The 10,000 people allegedly taken into custody. What about their rights?
Exactly. The ICE agents who violate the law should be arrested and held accountable. They are not above the law. When I wrote a letter to the Star Tribune, I remember very well being governor, and I was stopped for speeding in Wisconsin. By the time I got back to the residence, it was packed with media. And I remember WCCO television, they really went after me. And I finally said, look, I just sped through Wisconsin. I didn't steal it. I mean, they would have thought that I was a mass killer on the loose. But they were holding me accountable. Why can't we hold an ICE agent accountable?
But don't you think that if somebody were to arrest them for illegal acts that they are doing, that would ensure that he sends the military in? I mean, it's
I
just a
don't,
fine line
I
of,
don't know. That's why I would bring other people in. But if we're going to say we're not going to enforce the law for fear of some consequences, we've got a real problem in this country. Because then the mafia can come together and say, you know what, we can overpower them too. So maybe they'll leave us alone. No, the law is very clear. There's several things about the Constitution that we as Americans don't pay enough attention to. One is there's no such thing as group rights. There's only individual rights. And that was the foundation of the 1964 decision on segregation. We don't grant group rights. You can't take a group like the Somalis and say, we're going to go after you. No. Individual violators, you bet your life. Groups, no.
Governor, can we ask more about the why? Because you are in Florida. You have vastly more undocumented immigrants in Florida than we do in Minnesota. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure people there are asking you, all of our friends, relatives across the country are asking us why. And I think one of the answers we have is because our governor ran for vice president and really took on the president. Is that the reason? What do you think? Why Minnesota? Is it the fraud? Was that what put us on the radar? Is this fraud against the government? Is it our governor?
The fraud issue is a completely, totally separate item. It has nothing more to do with this than the fact that I drank orange juice this morning. They're very separate. Is the state responsible for what occurred on the fraud side? Yes, they are, and they should be held accountable. But that has nothing to do with the violence and ICE, etc. ICE is there only as agents. They are not police. They are agents to enforce immigration and customs. And all I'm simply suggesting is, one, yes, this is retribution.
The president used that word. Did he not use that word? This is retribution.
Let's be clear. The one thing about Donald Trump is he's not subtle. He is very blunt. He will tell you, I'm going to steal money from the Treasury, and he goes right ahead and does it. He goes to businesses and said, bring me some nice gold bars, and I'll see things your way, and he does it. And then we have the Republicans rolling over, the very same people who called him con men. One of them is Secretary of State. They've all succumbed. This is kind of the unfolding of Nazi Germany. But the big difference is the competency in the Nazis was very high. Nobody ever accused them of being incompetent. They were evil, they were malicious, but they were competent. Here we have incompetency also with evil motives.
And people will push back and say that's too much.
Well, of course they will. They'll call me all sorts of names for saying this. And they're very good at calling names, but that's not the point. The point is for the three of us to have an intelligent discussion, and for those to listen in, to give us the benefit of listening. And if you disagree, contact us, and we'll be happy to discuss it. You're asking my opinion. One of the things I loved in college, I spent a lot of time studying German history. And there are some fundamental differences. We have a long history in this country of democracy. We're used to democracy. We expect democracy. We get outraged when tenets of democracy are violated. That's why people are on the streets demonstrating.
Yeah.
Germany did not have a history of democracy. It had quite the opposite. It was a history of autocracy and obedience. That's not we're just different backgrounds.
And
but that doesn't mean that we don't have the same despots, and that's what we do. Donald Trump wants to be the despot of America. He wants the total control of North and South America. That's his sphere of influence. And then he'll rattle his cage all the time. This whole thing with Greenland, we're not going to invade Greenland. We never were. But it kept everybody's attention off the Epstein files.
Can you explain how unique picking a fight with Minnesota is? You know and love Minnesota, and you came into the
Oh,
governor's office in perhaps one of the most unique fashions in state history. I remember it well. We haven't told the backstory, but my father was the AP reporter, and I remember watching very closely when the Republican candidate for governor was caught swimming naked in a pool, and suddenly John Grunseth was no longer on the ballot, and Arne Carlson was beating a two-term governor named Rudy Perpich, who was trying for a third term, much like the current governor was attempting. And suddenly you were catapulted into 2 terms of popular success out of nowhere, and ended up, being very popular after your party not choosing you, not even really being really willing to endorse you. I remember being at the governor's mansion and CNN there and saying, how can the party not endorse this really popular governor? Remember that?
oh, I remember it well. I
Yeah.
remember going down. I was asked to go to the state convention, and there was no prayer of endorsement. Matter of fact, there was no discussion of endorsement. Well, they introduced
Minnesotans
me,
loved
and
you, but your party didn't.
oh yeah, the party loved me. So as I'm walking toward the podium, they're all standing up and booing, and then I get to the podium, and they turned their back to me.
Wow.
So I gave a speech to their backs. No,
But Minnesotans reelected you when your party
yes,
literally turned their
and I
backs.
think that was, frankly, it was. Let me push myself aside. That was the start of what became the far right and the muscles of the far right. And that's really been a destructive force within America ever since, and
But you still
empowered.
defied it. You
Well,
were a person who still defied it and still got elected.
yeah,
Yes,
Governor
and I think
Carlson, can
we
we
can do it
talk
again.
I'd like to ask you a question about that because you obviously were really great on LGBTQ rights. You are not anti choice, right? You are a pro choice Republican. And do you think those were the 2 biggest issues that impacted you with the party?
I think those are the 2 biggest issues, but I think there was a bigger concern, and that's the concern of control. Can we control this person? And that's what's going on in America today. Prior to this cast going on, we had a discussion about it, and we may want to shift to that. When I was going through the political system, several things were noticeable. One is there was a high focus on competence. Regardless of whether it was Democrat or Republican, you couldn't argue with the competence of the other side because it was clearly there. I was so impressed with the competency level of the Anderson administration, Wendell Anderson.
Before you, you're
Mhm.
complimenting a Democrat.
Yes. I loved Wendell Anderson. I mean that sincerely. He brought in young, talented people who not only knew their stuff, but were comfortable dealing with the opposition. So if you had questions or inquiries or misunderstandings, whatever, they were willing to iron it out. But they always knew who the customer was. And the customer, for instance, in DNR and pollution control was always the well-being and the health of the public. It was not the loggers or the miners or the industries. It was always the public. The canoeist had a friend in that administration. Consumer affairs. They were always protecting the well-being of the consumer, not of the provider. And they were creative. They ran a very, very good ship. And we saw a lot of competency that we all took for granted. But steadily, particularly ever since Citizens United, we've allowed too many of the well-to-do to demonize government. To treat bureaucrats as if they're third-class citizens that couldn't get a job anywhere else. I remember toward the end of my office, I was literally in panic over the fact that we were losing our last talented person on bonds. Now, the public doesn't pay attention to that. The media doesn't pay attention to it. But boy, government should on bonds.
Yeah.
And I called him up and pleaded with him, would he stay? And he said, I've got some children to raise and I can triple my salary in public sectors and the private sectors. And I understood that. Government has to deal with the issue of competence. It was the lack of competence that got us into this fraud thing. It wasn't theft or putting money in people's pocket. It was just simply incompetent.
And you were state auditor. You were a state lawmaker. You knew the guts of government and how it worked
I
and
hope
how it
so.
didn't work, right? That
Yeah.
matters.
I would agree with you. I respect, business does it all the time. Business doesn't just go around and pick a CEO. The American dream is that you start at the bottom, and if you're capable and work hard, you move up and you move up to your highest level of proficiency. And that's what you expect. And government should be the same. We take experience and we demonize it. I'm not from government, so elect me.
Yeah.
Whoa, that's a winner.
But even
Why
Jesse
don't
Ventura,
why don't the Twins do that?
right?
Why don't the Twins do it? Say, I never played baseball, so start me. I mean, it's absurd.
But even Ventura, who was an outsider, people would say he hired a great cabinet.
Yes, he did.
Experts and
I
left
fully
alone,
agree. I
right?
fully agree.
And then on the flip side, people complained that Tim Pawlenty knew too much of government and he micromanaged government. So there are different ways to do it, right?
Yeah, there are different ways to do it. I think one thing that governors have to learn is to separate their personal ambition from their management of government. The management of government has to be apolitical and not political. I thought George Bush II politicized his administration way too much, and that opened up a lot of doors to Trump. And I think Tim Pawlenty had too many political aims, and that, I think, curbed the excellence of the bureaucracy. You want an independent group that reminds you of what is right and what is wrong, what will work, what will not work. Harry Truman, in a lot of respects, was a superb president in that he was smart enough to know what he didn't know. And he brought in people that were smarter than him. And when he was once asked about it, I'll never forget his response. I always bring in people smarter than me because they make me look good.
Absolutely.
And he was right.
Like Ventura, in retrospect, 25 plus years later, don't we look back and think, boy, Ventura was maybe a lot better governor that you handed the keys over to than you might have expected?
I fully agree. I fully agree.
And he has been standing up. I don't know if you've seen the news, but he went back to Roosevelt High School, his alma mater, and stood up and congratulated the students and staff for standing up against ICE. I don't know if you saw
no, I didn't see that. Wonderful. I'm glad to hear that.
And the students stood up, and he's going to be talking to us on this podcast after retiring from commentary in politics. He's back because of this issue.
That's wonderful. But you're raising very good points, and that is the separation of a good management system from a political system. And we have blurred it so badly in America that we don't separate the two.
Absolutely.
I always thought that Mitt Romney, when he ran for office, should really stress the management experience and the management background he had, because he would be managing the biggest management system in the world. And yet it doesn't even come up in campaigns.
Trump ran as a businessman. He talked about the fact he's going to run government like he ran his businesses, and we can talk about his businesses.
And he drove them into bankruptcy
6 times
and into court, and was convicted, I think, of 26 felonies. And he's doing the same with government. So maybe your illustration is pretty good. He was not a good
reality TV star where he looked like he hired and fired people successfully, right? Because of the reality TV image.
You're getting me into everything. Pretty soon we're going to be talking about Walt Disney. No. I just think that we as Americans have to realize that our responsibility as citizens goes beyond voting. It also goes to having a knowledge level and to participating. I remember my daughter came home with a paper, and it was the birth of democracy in Greece. And I was stunned to read that citizenship in Greece, ancient Greece, consisted not just of voting and participating, but you had to fully participate in the affairs of your state. We
Okay.
don't expect that. We tell people vote and that's all.
Mm-hmm.
No, you have to vote and be responsible for your vote. I mean, we, the people, created this situation that we're currently in. We
Absolutely.
made it possible. We have to assume our responsibility and ask ourselves, how in the world did we do that?
Can I ask you a question about, I quit going to my precinct caucuses about 20 years ago. And I remember it was somebody brought a resolution and they wanted to put Save the Dolphins into, so Democrats, Save the Dolphins into the party platform. And I was just like, that's it. I'm done. Like, this is crazy. What are we talking about here? But I really feel like I grew up on the Iron Range, just so you know that. Actually, Perpich, his dad and my great grandpa Tomanovich were cousins and came over together from Krivi Put, Croatia.
Oh,
So,
my darned. Okay,
yeah,
yeah.
so I grew up in Evelyn. But, I think about the fact that maybe a moderate Democrat like myself and somebody who was very engaged in government, like I said, I lobbied for 23 years, but I quit going to precinct caucuses 20 years ago. And I know that I'm part of the problem because everybody should be going to precinct caucuses so that we're not getting these polarizing forces on both sides. And so I take responsibility for that and have February 3rd in my calendar and I have to go to precinct caucuses. Do you think that there's a better way to do this? I mean, obviously we do have these precinct caucuses that tend to turn out pretty polarizing or the farthest on both sides of the aisle. Do you think
Yeah.
we should just go away from that and do a primary? Like, what are your thoughts on that part?
I've been through both cycles with you, where starting out, they were good discussion groups.
Mm-hmm.
They were intelligent, they were policy oriented, and they ultimately led. And it's interesting, we talked about it before. Much of that led to the progress that we made in the Anderson administration that ultimately landed up on Time magazine. It wasn't just the political system excelling, it was the totality of our community, the business community, etc. And I remember, and I've given him great credit because I think he's really been under-recognized in his importance. And that was John Coles. He made great sacrifices with the Star Tribune to bring in really the best editorial writers, the best thinkers, and the best reporters. And to a very large extent, they kind of set the pace. And at the same time, the Citizens League, which brought the CEOs, it brought the leaders of labor, not the secondary or tertiary levels, but the primary levels, and worked with the political system. I mean, out of that came our entire metropolitan governance.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example.
And they're really struggling.
And everybody listened to once upon a time.
Yes.
Yeah, and they're really struggling, Governor. Like the Citizens League, it's as if Minnesota, that has always led in most of the metrics around civic engagement, voting, volunteerism, philanthropic donations. It seems as though we just, I just talked to Jake Loesch the other day, who's the, president or leads the Citizens League. And he's like, it's really hard for us to raise money. And it never used to be that way.
Yeah. You've got to get the top. And I think governors, and I'm involved in being part of the problem as well myself. I think governors have to realize the political system can't do anything by itself. They have to see themselves as part of a partnership. And I think what Citizens United did was get us away from that relationship. You asked before about taking on the Republican Party and winning in a primary. Do you know who the backbone of that campaign was? You won't believe it. It was business. It was business. I remember, let me tell you a story, if I may. Sandy Grieve was president of Ecolab, and he was a Grunstedt supporter.
Was Grunstedt from Ecolab too? Am I remembering it right?
Yeah,
okay, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah. Ironic.
And Sandy came over and said, I really want to help you get elected. I don't want this far right in here. You've got a good business background and blah, blah, blah. Well, Sandy Creed got the entire business community organized, and it was all get out the vote. He didn't give directives, go vote for Arne. He said, just get out the vote, because I know if they get out the vote, he'll win. Well, every time I would appear at a coffee party or some kind of a gathering, these business leaders would come up, pull out something of the pocket and say, you tell Sandy I called my list. You tell Sandy I called my list. I don't think anybody activated him more than Sandy Grieve did. It was phenomenal. And that led to the outpouring in the primary. People were involved. And I think what government has to realize, and particularly governors, they preside. And like Wendell Anderson, you've got to bring them all together, understand what their concerns are, and how can we work towards common goals. What Minnesota wanted post-World War II, it wanted to be recognized. It's as simple as that. We were a flyover state. Nobody paid attention to us.
Governor,
And that's why getting Major League Sports was important.
Yep.
That's why recognizing the top companies in the world being headquartered in Minnesota was so important. Our agriculture was important. And all of a sudden, Time magazine says, my gosh, this is the state that works. Look at them.
Right. And Governor,
they
we
did.
still have those headquarter economies. This is
Yes,
the
we
thing I
do.
want to point. They are still there, but they're quiet now. And there's so much pushback now. I just followed religious leaders downtown Target. They marched on Target because I don't know if you saw, 2 Target employees were detained by ICE.
Yeah.
Turns out they were legal citizens. They were dumped.
That's
And
good.
they were kids.
Not had a statement. They have not
I
said.
think it's important that Governor Walz bring those leaders together. Together we can win. Separate, we'll lose.
But
And more importantly, we don't want to escalate the violence.
Afraid to say anything. They're afraid to be on the wrong side, the right side. We don't have any statement from we still have those huge corporations, and they don't want to participate in politics. They don't want to say the right thing, the wrong thing, so they don't say anything.
There just seems to be no civic engagement from these companies that Minnesotans built, right? That Minnesotans built.
And they're boycotting them now, too, by the way, and they're financially struggling. Target just fell off the list of the most respected companies in America for the first time ever.
Right. I think it would be well for the governor to give it a try. The worst that can happen is it fails. But for heaven's sakes, bring them in. Bring in your religious leaders, your academic leaders, etc. And get them to realize that together we got SWAT. Individually, we have no power. And that's true. At least try it. I mean, when you look at how America won World War II, we see it in terms of battles. But that's not where we won the war. Go back to what Yamamoto said after Pearl Harbor. I fear we have awoken a sleeping giant. One of the first things Franklin Roosevelt did was bring in the business leadership. And said, now how do we convert from building automobiles to building planes, tanks, jeeps, etc.? He brought in Kaiser, who had no background whatsoever in shipbuilding. And bingo, can you build Liberty ships? He was finally churning out 1 ship a day. 1 a day. Never in human civilization has anything close to that occurred. My point is, he understood the necessity of partnerships. I was just a child during World War II, but I can tell you I never saw America more together than then. Everybody had something to do, and they were expected. Children were expected to spend Saturdays going out and picking up newspapers and tin cans and going to the junkyard and getting 25 cents for them. And that was our part of the war.
Is it going to take a war to bring us together? Is it going to take something that's catastrophic?
Well, what we're going through right now is catastrophic. We're watching the destruction of our Constitution. We're watching the destruction of our democracy. And frankly, we're seeing violence. I mean, this death of Renee Good is stunning. The first reaction from the Trump administration is to call her some kind of a foreign agent.
Domestic terrorist.
Where is the empathy? We don't allow police to brandish weapons for a traffic stop.
Although Trump did call it a tragedy once he found out her father was a Trump supporter. That is his new
Well, I'm
phrase.
not going to get into that silliness,
I,
but you understand my
yes,
point.
I know. I'm a
Okay.
reporter, so it's my job.
I think together,
Yeah.
if we marshal our forces together and speak as one, we can do it. And likewise, I'd like to see the Attorney General bring together a host of very fine lawyers and start talking about what ICE's limitations, in fact, are.
Governor, could we talk about what happened with 6 of the U.S. attorneys resigning last week? Obviously, Joe Thompson, who was acting for a while. I had met with him a few times on issues related to fraud because I represent legitimate disability service providers and their trade association. And we just wanted to help them kind of understand Medicaid better and the waivered services. I think it's just a huge loss to our state that we lost 6 of probably our most key U.S. attorneys here, and especially ones that understood and had been investigating the fraud. So I just want your take on kind of what happened there, if you don't mind.
I would not know.
Okay.
If I were to conjecture, and I will, I think each of them had integrity and said, I will not allow my superiors to dictate to me something that is unlawful and unethical. It's the same thing that is being discussed on the national level with Senator Kelly. I was in the military. It's always made very clear, as a soldier, you do not follow an illegal order. And that's why we have to make things very crystal clear in Minnesota. ICE will not be permitted to execute an illegal order. And if they do, they will be held accountable. They are not above the law.
And I know all the attorneys I've interviewed have said, by the way, this job is a great job. When you get a U.S. attorney job, this is what you go to law school for. This is representing the federal government. This is what you want to achieve. And when you've achieved that, you do not leave that position lightly or easily. And that does mean you were asked to do something that you cannot, and that you are doing something against every oath that you've been sworn to. You know, your spouse has worked in the legal world. You understand, I'm guessing, with Susan about what that world is like.
Let me digress for a moment.
Okay.
I brought up this whole thing with Senator Kelly and following the legal orders. My senior paper in college was on the Nuremberg trials. And one of the things that really beset the Allies, particularly the United States, was what law had they in fact violated? And they had to invent the law. Crimes against humanity. And then the Germans came back with the autocratic response, I was following orders. Everybody was following orders. And we had to come back with another interpretation of law. And that is to say, that is not a legal defense. You cannot follow illegal orders. When you go through the German papers, you'll notice that they refer to the whole Holocaust as the final solution. And when you ask the superior officers in Germany, what was the final solution? Oh, it was just win the war. It had nothing to do with Jews. It had nothing to do with incarceration or execution. Nonsense. The one American dissenter on the Nuremberg trials was Senator Robert Taft. And he wrote a very powerful and persuasive dissent. And he basically said it by holding the Nuremberg trials, the United States is essentially saying to the victors goes the spoils, and in this case, the right to make ex post facto law. And he went on to say, there will be a day when we will regret it. Well, I concluded that there was justification for laws against humanity. I strongly supported the outcomes of the Nuremberg trials, and I think the United States and the Allies did exactly the right thing. But Taft was right. Vietnam War, my lie, came back to bite us. And what we have to recognize, and this does relate to ICE, we can't just go around saying certain pieces of American government are immune from legal consequences. They're not.
Yeah.
The president is not above the law. Richard Nixon found that out, and Donald Trump will also find that out. ICE is not above the law. And how dare they proclaim that they're enforcing the law when in fact they're violating it? Arrest them.
Before we got started earlier, where you said something, basically that Congress seems to get very angry if any money goes to the bottom, right, to help folks in need. We've seen that clearly through up to 17 million people are going to lose, access to Medicaid.
Yeah.
And if people don't realize how much money, how little money you have to make in order to qualify for that, like, go look it up. And so I just kind of wanted your take on, like, when you were governor, Democrats and Republicans came together to do Minnesota Care, right? I mean, that was a bipartisan issue. You had Dwayne Benson, you had Linda Berglund, your administration came together to do something to ensure that folks who didn't qualify for Medicaid, but didn't maybe get health insurance through their employer, that there was somewhere for them to kind of land.
Yeah.
And,
well,
it's not a lot of folks. It's only a little over 100,000 people here in Minnesota. But I want your take on that we are throwing Americans, very poor Americans, off of their health care. And we're sending $40 billion to Argentina like it's nothing. And I just want your take on that.
Well, the simple take is it's criminal. I was born poor. My brother almost died because the doctor refused to operate until he could get money in advance, in spite of the fact it was a public hospital and it was to be free. It was Fordham Hospital in the Bronx of New York. And he was attacked with appendicitis. And he was rushed to the hospital. I remember standing by the ambulance crying. And they refused to operate. And my mother, we had no telephone. She ran down to the church and begged and borrowed a few dollars. And finally, at 7:00, his appendix burst. And the poison spread all over his little body. And it's a terrible disaster. And how America can somehow go after the poor is incomprehensible. Absolutely incomprehensible. American government was built on the notion that, one, we will help each other. Two, we'll create a society in which the overwhelming majority of people can prosper. Mm-hmm. We are in the sharing business. I remember a very fine sermon from a black minister from Princeton. And he said, God gave us two hands to climb the ladder. And one hand is to pull you up, and the other hand is to pull somebody else up. Mm-hmm. America was kind. When World War II was over, it was the United States that rebuilt all of war-torn Europe. It was President Truman who called Herbert Hoover, a Republican ex-president, to the White House and asked him, could he be in charge of the recovery of Europe? And Europe at that time was facing the very likely prospect of several million people dying of starvation. But Hoover had done it after World War I. He was a genius when it came to organization. He organized everything. People may not realize it, but Minnesota farmers contributed to it. School children contributed to it. We all participated. We were going to help our allies, our friends in Europe. We were a nation that understood partnership. We understood human relationships. What are we doing today with Donald Trump ripping everything apart? Mm-hmm. Tearing NATO apart, tearing our alliances apart, tearing the EU apart, threatening everybody. Retribution over anybody that disagrees. It has no purpose, it has no logic, it has no sense. And then you have to back it up with lie after lie after lie, and then power.
Governor, thank you for sharing that.
Name one country in the world that looks at America and says thank you.
Russia.
Who? That's a very good answer. You're right. Let me tell you another story. We came back from Sweden in 1948, and it was on the Gripsholm. And I was stunned. Everywhere, every deck, every walking space was occupied with these trunks. These were largely Eastern Europeans who had been displaced as a result of World War II coming to the United States. But the United States was not welcoming them. We made a stop at Halifax, and that's where they all got off. And if you look at, yes, they were welcome into Canada, but not to the United States. And if you look at the demography of Minnesota, I was stunned. Canada is number one, and one of the largest reasons is because many of those Europeans came in, settled in Canada for 3 years, qualified for a visa to the United States, and came down to Minnesota. Kindness, generosity, helping people is a winner. Doing what we're doing now is a loser. I mean, look at a person like Vance. He called Donald Trump every negative name in the book. Now he's his vice president, doing all the duties that Donald Trump wants him to. He's groveling. How does he live with himself? How does he sleep at night?
I think he's probably fine. I know that Mary and I want to know your take on what happened last night in the vote in the House, or yesterday on.
We want to pivot to BWCA mining. I know mining is an issue you have been concerned about and talking about for years, decades, wishing it got more attention and coverage. We want you to be able to talk about this.
Well, the United Nations just released a report basically saying it's a global crisis. And it's probably the number one issue behind war right now facing the world. The shortages are just dramatic.
Do you mean environmental protection issues are the number? Okay.
In water. Right? This
and
really
water.
People can't find water. Something like 70% are living in areas that have water scarcity problems.
Yep.
And we in Minnesota at the early stages of that. Some of it is runoff from agriculture, some of it from minerals, etc. But these foreign mining conglomerates are uniting right now, and we have two big ones merging. And on February 5th, they'll announce that, yes, we will merge. And that will, of course, ultimately destroy the waters of the BWCA. But it will also, because they sit on the Mississippi watershed, the St. Croix watershed, and the St. Louis River, they will also destroy Lake Superior, Mississippi River, and overall some 40 million people will be having mercury and arsenic in their water.
And Governor, you think from the federal, state, governor, legislature that nobody's done enough to stop this is your belief, right, for a long time?
Well, it's not a belief. It's a fact. Under Governor Dayton and Governor Walz, who both made deals with Tom Bach to win the primaries running for governor, we don't know what the deals were, but we know what the consequences are. The Minnesota health community, including the University of Minnesota and the Mayo Clinic, has been petitioning for over a decade. Please, state government, include a health assessment impact. And they can't even get a hearing. Not a single environmental group has been able to get a hearing on any bill that changes our mining laws. Now, with the BWCA being clearly a focal point, I think all of that's going to collapse. I think Minnesotans will unite and will insist that, yes, we have a health requirement, no question about it.
Even with this moving through Congress now, because this is moving in Washington.
It's moving in Washington, but there's nothing to prevent Minnesota from doing it. Right now, Governor Walz has been silent, but he's been part of the problem. But I do think that if we have more podcasts like this that actually talk about the problem, we will not have a state left. There has never in the history of mankind been a sulfide mining operation that has not harmed the adjacent waters and environment. never won.
Never won.
Walter Mondale was the first person that I know of that blew the whistle on this. And his statement was, never, never, never has there been a successful sulfide mining operation. Let me just take a half a minute and explain what it is. Our laws were established to deal with iron ore. And so matters of economics and health were not a consideration. That came back to bite us with the tailings issue.
Yep, and a lot of asbestos for miners up north. Yeah, a lot of
you
asbestos.
got it, right. Well, those health requirements are still not in the law. And I would argue, of course, it's got to have to do with money. 2010 opened up the floodgates to big money. We wrote a report called The Future is Today. We put it out in August of 2021. In May of 2021, the University of Minnesota put out a report that the legislature is corrupt. Let's start using words. They are corrupt. What are they doing? They are basically selling influence over legislation to wealthy donors. The exact word is shape. They get the opportunity to, quote, shape legislation. Well, I don't get the opportunity to shape legislation. I don't think you two get the opportunity to shape legislation. But if you're a big donor, you get the opportunity to shape legislation. The last thing the foreign mining conglomerates want is a health requirement because they can't pass it. It's as simple as that. They never have. Okay, so that's the issue. But I do think that the sports people are now activated. What?
Well, I wanted to say one thing about, once had a few Republican lawmakers say to me, we really don't think that can be done safely. So maybe we should just make a requirement that they need like $2 billion in insurance because they'd never be able to get that.
You can't drink money. You cannot drink money. We got to protect the water.
Absolutely.
Look, I'm drinking water right now. My gosh. I mean, I don't want any arsenic in it.
No.
I mean,
Governor, we're delighted we had so much time to talk to you. Delighted you're willing to do this podcast. I do want to just have a moment before we're out of time to thank you, first of all, for the impact that you had on my family and our life. I know when you told the story earlier about the impact your brother and growing up poor, I don't know how much you know that the story, your life paralleled my father's life and the impact he had on my dad. My dad also grew up very poor as a Scandinavian immigrant, and how much he respected you and what you meant to his life. My dad, AP reporter.
Yeah, I know very well.
Grew up absolutely dirt poor, and education turned his life around, and military service, and got to go to school on the GI Bill and fell in love with reporting and really public service and covering you. And he will always say, Arne and I were freshmen together. That's the story he would say, that the two of you started in the legislature together, and how tough and smart you were, and how he connected with you and identified. And he would say, Arne and I both grew up poor and tough. And he would always say, I think that guy's as crusty and smart as I am. This is what he would say. He would always say, Arne gets me. And do you know, when he retired and you threw him a retirement party at the governor's mansion and our whole family was there, I believe it was the last party a governor ever threw for a reporter.
It could be. I had great respect for the media. I mean that most sincerely, because they ask the penetrating questions. And that's precisely what they should do. I'm afraid a lot of it's gone now. I'm very concerned about it. Somebody once accused me of being overly syrupy with them. But what they don't realize is how helpful they were in managing. I told our commissioners time and time again, every time you make a decision and you think you're going to keep it private, just pretend for a moment it's on page 1 of the Star Tribune.
Yep.
No, and it was the golden age of journalism. We now know that in retrospect. That's when we had 2 healthy papers. We had an enormous press corps. It was a really special time, and I just want to thank you for
I'm delighted. Thank you.
A really special memory for my family.
The other thing they did, They force you to do your work. No, I have nothing but marvelous memories. I truly mean that. And there were so many good people. People have asked, what one thing did you enjoy the most? And maybe enjoy is not the right, let's say satisfying. The problem with being in a policy position, you're dealing with the general public. You're not dealing with individuals. One Saturday morning, we're out in Forest Lake, and somebody rang the doorbell, and it was a mother with a little boy. And the little boy was really clinging to her leg, well beyond the normal. And she apologized profusely for bothering me. And I said, no, that's just fine. Come on in. And I kept looking at the little boy because he was really clinging. And then she started to explain a story. And she said, my little boy is autistic. And he only connects with one person outside the family. And it's a high school student who comes over in the afternoon, and she works with him. And they can communicate, and she can really be helpful to the little boy. But he said, now your administration is coming in with all sorts of rules that require professional training for these people. And if those rules are to go into effect, she won't be able to help the little boy. And I remember Monday morning calling the commissioner and explaining what the problem was, and he was very gracious. He said, yes, I'll take care of it. Well, several days went by and nothing happened. So I summoned the whole top echelon in and said, you got 24 hours to come up with some exceptions, which they did. That Christmas, I got a little Christmas tree with lollipops popped all over them, and a nice little note from her saying, this is made by my son.
Oh.
I treasure that. And I think the reason I mention this story, and obviously you can tell I'm emotional about it, is because people in public office have to remember they're not playing a chess game. They're playing with human lives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And when you talk about healthcare, you're not talking about an abstraction. You're talking about a painful reality of people who are struggling to make a living, struggling to educate their children, and then bingo, they can't afford healthcare.
Well,
healthcare must be treated as a right. It must be universal, and it must be accessible to everybody without exception.
I agree.
Without exception.
Yep, 100%. I believe healthcare is a human right. So,
and let's also,
Governor.
Let me end on this one.
Mm-hmm.
Lately, you'll notice on Facebook there's been a lot of postings on Eisenhower. I don't know how Facebook operates, and I don't know why they do this, but there seems to be a cycle that Eisenhower has emerged as a very great and kind leader. Eisenhower loved his troops. Mm-hmm. He knew who won the war. He knew who fought it, and he knew who died. And when he became president, he was a strong, strong protector of the highly progressive income tax that he inherited. 91% on the wealthy, 54% on corporate profits. And he was asked one time, don't you think this is retarding growth in America? And he came back, and there was a paragraph that I recommend to every student to read. And he talked about how no corporation need pay a single penny in income taxes. And the reason is if they would invest in their employees with good pay and good benefits, if they would get more active in the international market, if they would do more research and development, by the time they start to engage in improving their product and growing their product and getting market accessibility, there won't be enough for an income tax. Now, over the years, those taxes were lowered. Where did that money go? Did it really go into research and development? Did it really go in to help the shareholder? It went into buybacks that enhanced the wealth of the people on the top of the corporate ladder. My point is this: anytime there's any program that benefits the middle class, the uppers will always call it socialism. Everything is socialist. Social Security is socialism. Medicare is socialism. Medicaid is socialism. Anytime you give 10 cents to a poor person, it's socialism. But when you give money to Musk by the millions, oh, that's an investment. Yeah.
All
Or
right.
how about a little investment in the bottom?
Yep.
How about improving their quality of life? How about a little investment in the children and their quality of their education? How about an investment in good housing?
Well, thank you, Governor, so much for doing this. Honestly,
It's kind of fun, isn't it?
So
It-
fun. You are sharp as a tack, and we learned and appreciated so much.
No, I think it's a great exchange. Thank you. I do appreciate it. I really do. And I honestly believe America will pull out of it. Not because its leadership is so extraordinary, but notice who's fighting the battle. It's the public, the people.
It is. It's
The
the
people
public.
understand it. They got it.
Yep.
Thank you, Governor. Thanks.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank
All
you.
right. Have a good
Yay.
day. Bye.
There's water with no
Yay.
arsenic.
No
For now.
arsenic.